25-30, 35-40, 45-50, 45. There goes Davis. Oh, my God. Davis is going to run it all the way back. Auburn's going to win the football game.
They give it back now to the 30. They're down to the 20. All the band is out on the field. He's going to go into the end zone.
Four-man Alabama rush. Got him. No, they didn't. Oh, my gracious.
Yep.
How about that?
Well, it is a not so happy valley as we come to you for a week 10 live show reaction here on the 3 Technique. We've got 7 top 25 teams going down, including 4 inside the top 15. We've got November chaos to talk about, coaching legacies, missed tackles. Gentlemen, welcome in to a slightly depressed version of our live show. Our Texas A&M Aggies just got shoved in a locker in South Carolina, but that's okay. Plenty of other things to talk about on this Saturday night. If you're new to the show, we're a college football podcast at the intersection of the X's and O's and the Jimmies and the Joes, and we'd love to have you hang out with us on a normal basis. Hit like, hit subscribe. Trey Reeves, Garrett Turney, I'm Mitch Mason. Fellas, a lot to talk about here tonight. This is certainly a weekend that I think is going to go down as one of the crazier ones in the 2024 season. 7 top 25 teams lose. We had a couple of undefeated teams lose. Iowa State loses. I mentioned the Aggies go down. They were undefeated in SEC play. That conference is now wide open. Trey, as we kick this off, and we'll get to Ohio State and Penn State in a minute, but what kind of catches your eye as the top storyline from a crowded Saturday afternoon?
Yeah, I think you hit it on the nail on the head with the chaos. It was a slow start to the day. Felt really chalky early on. Felt like Penn State had a chance. I know we'll get into that in just a second. Felt like Penn State had a chance early, but then Ohio State really retook control of that game. The early window was pretty mellow. A little bit of drama here and there, but the favored teams won out. And then the afternoon hit, man. And just monsoons were happening across the country that played a role in games. Undefeated teams go down, like you said. And then some games that just completely flipped the narrative that we thought we would see completely on the head. Like we whiffed on a couple in our preview show, sure. Just from a narrative standpoint, even of how we thought the game would go and how the flow would be. So very surprising Saturday. Looked sleepy on the slate outside of a couple big games, but those sleepy ones always get you.
Well, and I think especially after last week where, remember, I called on the preview show. I said, we're due for a chalky week. And we got comments saying, are you kidding me? This season is one that's been the exact opposite of that. And then really that's exactly what we got. I believe 14 of the 15 ranked teams that played won outright. The only one that lost last week was LSU going on the road to Texas A&M. It was a stretch to think that maybe that would duplicate itself this week. And the teams that we kind of anticipated taking care of business, Clemson falls to Louisville, for instance. Iowa State falls to Texas Tech. They just did not get the job done. And so I think there's a lot of things we can extrapolate from some of these losses, and we'll talk about them in due time. Garrett, we'll start with the really sleepy affair in Happy Valley. And all of our segments here on the show brought to you by HomefieldApparel.com. You can use our code 3TechPod for 15% off your entire first order. I really hope that if folks bought the Penn State bomber jacket, that they haven't burned them in protest to James Franklin today, because Garrett, the offense was dead for Penn State once again. James Franklin continues to come up short in the big games, and whether it's ranked on ranked, whether it's against Ohio State, this man cannot win a big game. And honestly, shame on us for expecting anything to change.
Yeah, I think my favorite tweet on this game was someone saying that Penn State is just a government psyop to get Ohio State a top 10 win. I thought that was pretty much, kind of summed it up. I don't believe in Penn State as a real. Has anybody seen Penn State for real? Like, can we get, actual visual checks that this is a real college football team and not just, some kind of weird amalgamation of other people that are here just to serve the Big Ten's purposes? Because I'm not convinced. Look, I didn't get to watch a lot of this game live. I was helping a friend move, and so was kind of watching it on my phone and catching up on some highlights. And man, it just felt like I wasn't having to catch up on very much. Real sleepy game, like you were talking about, Mitch. Just not a real fun one to watch, just if I'm being honest. I saw, Penn State gets that pick six, and I'm like, okay, we're off to the races. Like, Ohio State's in trouble. They're on the ropes. And then, Penn State doesn't score a touchdown with their offense. They just don't find a way to punch it in. A couple stops on the goal line. And that's pretty much wraps for Penn State. Kind of, astounding if you really think about it, because they have a solid run game. You think you could find a way to punch it in, but Ohio State, to their credit, they kind of bowed up and kind of just showed that they were the better team after we questioned them being able to get it done in the line of scrimmage last week. They found a way to get it done this week, and maybe not necessarily perfect, not a perfect job, but they found a way to get it done. And yeah, at this point, James Franklin should kind of be ashamed of himself and his program, because it just hasn't been a very good product against the top of the top. You can beat up anybody you want to in the lower ranks of the Big Ten, but he can't beat top teams.
He said that expectations come with this job. He was booed off the field. He got into a fight, a verbal altercation with a fan at the mouth of the tunnel. Fire Franklin chants broke out as he went up the tunnel. And he said that, expectations come with the job and that no one's looking in the mirror harder than himself. What you see is not a very pretty picture. He's now 1-10 against Ohio State. He's lost 8 in a row. I believe for his career, he's 1-17 against top 5 teams, top 10 teams. He's 1-14 at Penn State. And he just is allergic to winning these big games. It's held Penn State back for a decade now. And while they still can absolutely get into the playoff, they're 7-1. It feels like we had a chance to see if Penn State was ready to be a championship contender. We thought that they might be there after the way that they had figured out a way to get to this game 7-0. And then sure enough, it's same song, different verse. Trade, 2 things that stood out to me from this game: the way that Penn State was absolutely bullied in the trenches, and the freak turnovers. I think you can talk about maybe the turnovers for Penn State felt unlucky. That pick as they're driving at the end of the first half was just a straight drop by the wide receiver, and it ends up in the cornerback's hands. But for me, Penn State's leading rusher was their tight end. Tyler Warren was 3 of 47. The rest of the team collectively 32 attempts, 120 yards total. We spent the preview show talking about how Penn State was in position to be the more physical team. Ohio State is holding their offensive line together with duct tape and baling wire, and it was the exact opposite. Penn State had no answer for the Buckeyes on either side of the ball.
Yeah, and for me, the big thing was they just really couldn't rise to the occasion. And Ohio State really gave them an opportunity to get back into this game and take control of this game early on. They had the pick 6 to put them up 10-0. You have the fumble out the side of the end zone, the touchback fumble, right? And then after that fumble, you go 6 plays and have to punt, don't even cross midfield or stall out around midfield. And then you're looking good. You're looking to take the lead right before halftime. And then there's the interception that you mentioned, where it's just a freak outright drop right on the receiver's hands, and it ends up an interception in the end zone. So 3 drives really is what you're talking about for this Penn State offense, where they were in scoring position. They ended field goal, interception, field goal. Not going to get it done against most teams from a power conference, let alone the number 4 team in the country, the Ohio State Buckeyes. And on the other side of the ball, we highlighted really an issue that Ohio State was having running the football. They kind of rectified that today a bit. It wasn't explosive always. It wasn't, running for 10 to 15 yards of play or anything crazy like that, but it was 4.5 a carry, establishing the run, dominating the line of scrimmage of that, and really controlling the game from the point of attack on the offensive side of the ball as well. When you talk about how many offensive line issues they were having, they were down their number 1 blocking tight end as well. That's a really impressive statement from the Buckeyes to go in and say, nope, we're still Ohio State. We're going to run the football and we're going to control this game. And our defense is going to keep Penn State at bay. We're not even really going to be threatened by them to the point where we feel like we need to be extremely explosive or do anything crazy on the offensive side of the ball. We're going to keep them at arm's reach. We're going to trust our defense, and we're going to do just enough on the ground game to really salt this one away.
Yeah, Andy Kotelnicki came into this game, and you felt like he was an X factor for Penn State. Finally, they have an explosive offense.
First drive looked good too, right? The scripted drive was great, but it's that meme that we all love to see. Like, now let's see the unscripted plays.
Yeah, Kotelnicki, as an offensive coordinator, was held scoreless on the offensive side as far as not getting into the end zone for the first time since 2021, when Jim Knowles once again held Kotelnicki's offense out of the end zone. And I tweeted that out. I said Jim Knowles is taking Kotelnicki and Drew Aller to church right now, because at one point, I think it was at even the 3-minute mark of the second quarter, before Penn State had a chance to drive and put up a touchdown at the end of the first half, Penn State still did not have a completion to a pass catcher, a wide receiver, or a tight end. They were held with a goose egg for the majority of the first half. In total, Aller goes 12 of 20 for 146 and interception. Those 12 completions, 6 of them went to the running back, Nick Singleton. I mean, when your offense is swinging the ball out of the backfield, that's just not a recipe for success. And Penn State had no vertical game. They had no explosive plays to keep Ohio State's defense in check. They were able just to tee off and ultimately stack the box. Sacks for Ohio State, I guess they just had 2. But Drew Aller was uncomfortable that entire game. Penn State just never got in a rhythm offensively. And now for Penn State, Garrett, you mentioned it off the top. Penn State was up 10-0. I mean, we're talking about this game like Penn State trailed the entire time. They kicked an early field goal. They had an interception that goes for a pick 6 on a beautiful coverage disguise. Will Howard throws right into a bait and switch. And Penn State's up 10-0. But, guys, you dig into James Franklin's career, of the 1-14 record that he has against top 5 teams, 7 of those losses he's blown double-digit leads, and 3 of those 7 have come to Ohio State. I mean, this was literally the same script that we've seen time and time again, where James Franklin and Penn State jump out to an early lead, and then they just let the game plan go to the mud. And, credit to Chip Kelly. I thought he schemed up some nice calls. Will Howard was slinging easy completions. They had good motion. They had Penn State's DBs in a whirlwind. Very, very quality win for Ohio State. Terrible loss for James Franklin. So I'll ask you this, with kind of all this conundrum at the top, and we'll talk about Georgia here in a minute. Is Ohio State right back to being the second best team behind Oregon in your mind?
I don't think so personally. I mean, I wasn't impressed with Georgia. I'm sure we'll talk about them later. I wasn't impressed with how Georgia looked today, but I still don't think that this game didn't necessarily send me anything that tells me Ohio State really just blew them out of the water and played really well, right? Like, they took advantage of the opportunities that were there. Penn State definitely let them get back in that game, and they did what they needed to do. But it didn't look to me like there was an Ohio State team out there that was just, cruising past Penn State. Remember, this is a 7-point game to finish. So, I don't think that they quite deserve that. Obviously, they'll jump to 3, and I think that's deserved. They're going to have to do more down the stretch, and they certainly have the ability to, right? Like, you have these games where you got to go on the road to a tough place and survive. They survive, they advance, and now they get the chance to go and prove that they are one of those best teams. If you get that rematch with Oregon at the end of the season, they get the chance to do that because they survive and advance in a tough environment. So, credit to them where it's due. I just didn't see anything that I think necessarily puts them up at that number 2 spot.
I think they're number 2 by default right now. I don't know that anyone else has really done anything to go up and take it, because I don't think, personally, I bet the AP poll has them at number 2 tomorrow based on beating number 3 on the road. Probably going to be number 2 or number 3 in the college football playoff poll on Tuesday. That'll mean they're the 5 seed because Oregon's going to be number 1, but I just don't know who else you put at number 2 right now. There's not really a team that really wants to jump up and take it. I don't think Georgia's really has any desire to take that. We saw that against Florida today. I don't think you could put Miami, I guess. They're the only other undefeated team up there right now, but they play from behind a lot and played with their food against Duke today, and their defense is leaking points lately. Texas lost the only game they've played against a comparable competition, and Tennessee finally scored in the first half today for the first time since September 21st. So I don't know who else you put there other than Ohio State right now. So they're just kind of locked into that 2 spot by default.
Well, so Georgia's at number 2 right now. So you'd
I
have
think
to
they're
have.
going to get jumped, though. I
You think
really
they're going to get jumped?
Yeah.
Okay. I think Ohio State probably comes in at number 3, but I do believe that they're the second best team in the country right now. And we'll talk about Carson Beck in Georgia in just a minute. Yeah, we'll talk about that in just a minute. But the Georgia Bulldogs are not the same Georgia team that we've grown accustomed to. So, yeah, good win for Ohio State. I thought they felt like they were in control once they came back and took the lead. I felt like, okay, Penn State's not capable of winning this game. Nothing that I saw on the field led me to believe that Penn State was capable of mounting a comeback. The offensive play calling, especially in the red zone, oh my goodness, twice Penn State gets stuffed on goal-to-go situations. They come away with no points. They had 4 red zone possessions. They get 6 points, 2 field goals out of it. Just an embarrassing offensive effort from Penn State, and a lot of credit, I think, to Jim Knowles, the defenses that he drew up, and the way that Ohio State's defensive line just refused to bend, and certainly didn't break in this one. All right, the other 2 games from our big 3, really not that interesting, to be quite honest. Oregon beats Michigan 38-17. Michigan hung around in this game for a little bit, and then it felt like Oregon, when they really decided to put the pedal down, were able to pull away, especially late cover. For those of us that had Oregon -14 in the hook, we appreciate that. SMU, as of recording, I don't think they'd gone final yet. At least
it's going final right now. They just took the final knee. 48-25 was the final.
Okay. So Pitt came back just a little bit, but a dominating effort from the Mustangs. Trey, which of these 2 games did you find more intriguing? Do you think the bigger storyline comes out of? I'll let you run with it.
Well, Oregon was impressive. If you take out the third quarter, I don't know what it is about the third quarter with Oregon. They just don't seem interested in scoring points or being the dominant team they are the other 3 quarters. And that's kind of holding them back on some of these big spreads. But I was impressed with their offense in the first half, especially just from the word go. They were ready to go. Michigan hung around a little bit, kind of like I thought they might, but going forward on 4th down towards the end of the game, set up Oregon for kind of the clinching touchdown for the cover. Yeah, I mean, it was a business-like approach for Oregon on the road. They're not doing things extremely flashy, and when you kind of struggle in the third quarter, it's not going to look that great on the scoreboard, but they're getting stuff done on the road. They're winning all the games they should, and now you look up, and they have maybe one more challenging regular season game this year. They have Maryland at home, at Wisconsin, who got blitzed by Iowa today, and then Washington at home in the end of the year in a rivalry game. But again, it's at home. So looking like they're going to be penciling themselves into that one spot, at least going into the Big Ten championship game.
Mm-hmm. Oregon able to run the ball for 176 yards. At times, it felt like Michigan was pushing the Ducks around in the trenches, but you look at the numbers, 105 yards on 28 carries. That's just under 4 yards a pop. Oregon kind of right at the beginning of the game, and then late as they were salting it away, they really stiffened. They didn't allow Michigan to pick up those crucial yards on the ground.
It felt a little bit like the Texas game for Michigan, right? Like it was like Oregon started fast and just clearly had better athletes on the field than Michigan.
Mm-hmm. Michigan looked slow. At times, Michigan looked slow. Trayshawn Holden, there were a couple of replays of him just literally blowing by the corner. Trayshawn has a big day, six receptions for $149. One thing to watch for the Ducks, Tez Johnson left that game with an injury, I do believe, just 1 catch for 11 yards. He was gone pretty early. For Michigan, it feels like Davis Warren had maybe his most complete game, 12 for 21, 164 yards, 2 touchdowns. Both of those touchdowns were balls that felt like he pressed the wrong button almost. I mean, he threw those into double and triple coverage in the end zone, threaded the absolute thinnest of needles. But shout out to him. He kept his team in it. Colson Loveland has a big game as well, 7 for 112. Oregon's 9-0, 6-0 in the conference. Michigan's 5-4. They are legitimately fighting to go to a bowl game at this point, which is just so tragic. I mentioned the offensive struggles for Penn State. The play calling by Sharon Moore and that offensive staff, especially late as they were trying to stay in it, they're trying to force their hand. really, really bad. 4th and goal from inside the red zone. I've forgotten exactly where they lined up, but they run a trick play that just had no chance of succeeding whatsoever. Good coverage by Oregon. The better team certainly steamrolled to a victory late in this one. For SMU, their defense, man, it stood on its head. And we wondered, Trey, in the preview show, we wondered if Pitt's defense was going to be able to hold the Ponies' offense at bay. That was absolutely not the case. But I thought SMU, for all the points that they scored in this game, their defense was so smothering early. Eli Holstein never got anything going. Des Reed was bottled up. I was very impressed with how the Mustangs showed up in a ranked win. They sell out the Hilltop. It looked like a program that is ready to take that next step and compete at a high level.
Yeah, they really just blitzed Pitt from the word go. Scored on 5 of their 7 possessions in the first half. And you mentioned Pitt moved the ball a little bit, kicked a couple field goal attempts, made one, missed one. But that first half, it was just all SMU. And they really buried any chance Pitt had very early on, like 21-3 before they could even really blink.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great total team effort for SMU. I think this absolutely solidifies them as now quite possibly, guys, an ACC frontrunner, right? Clemson lost. We'll talk about them in just a moment. But now you look at the two teams that have the inside track. Congratulations, SMU Mustangs. It's you and Miami. And, Miami had a very up and down day against Duke. If you catch someone like Miami on your best day, we could be talking about SMU really being a contender to win the ACC championship game and get into the playoff. I mean, you smile, you laugh, but from what my eyes are telling me on the field, it's very possible.
I smile because I'm just picturing that Mustang popping up in the number 4 seed in the bracket and how pissed that's going to make college football playoff anti-expansionists.
Well, the funny thing about this too, that loss to BYU could be their only loss on their schedule, and they could get in as an at-large bid if their only loss is to the ACC champ and the possible Big 12 champ if BYU can finish their season right. So if you're telling me your only 2 losses are to conference champs and you got to look around, there's already chaos happening in the SEC. A couple of those teams could drop to 2, maybe 3 losses. You could have an at-large bid from SMU just if they can finish the season out. They finished with Boston College, Virginia, and Cal. That's not a murderer's row. It's something that I think they can handle. 2 of those games at home. They go to Virginia, but the other 2 at home. SMU is going to be all right.
Bigger picture, yeah. I think the Big Ten especially, like you mentioned the chaos in the SEC, I do think there's enough teams that will emerge in the 10-2 range in the SEC, but the Big Ten just does not have that middle tier that can sneak up and make it a 4 or 5 bid league. I think the Big Ten is capped at maybe 3. I guess if Indiana is going to be the interesting one, because if they go 11-1 with a loss to Ohio State, then that's going to be really interesting how the committee treats them. But that is opening the door for a second ACC team.
SMU has a bye this week, which, boy, that feels good going into an off week. And then you have Boston College at Virginia, home against Cal, guys. I mean, this is 11-1 that's staring SMU in the face. Now, I know expect the unexpected this season, no doubt about it. So they can't let their foot up off the gas after this bye week. But you look at the game on paper, and that's 3 wins for the SMU Mustangs. So really fascinating story to monitor there. Let's go over to the SEC, do a recap there. All of our Saturday storylines brought to you by our friends over at Baller Pickleball, 3Tech Pod for 10% off your entire order there. Guys, I think we have to start with curb stomping in Columbia, South Carolina. Shane Beamer is not known as a winning football coach. He's not known as a guy who gets up in the big moment. Today, he got up in the big moment. And his South Carolina Gamecocks knock off the 10th-ranked Texas A&M Aggies 44-20. A lot of frustrations with this game from the 3 of us. Being transparent here, I think objectively the story here is the lack of tackling from Texas A&M. I don't know about you guys, but this felt like the worst tackling performance that I've seen from not just our team, but from an SEC team, a Power 4 team. maybe ever. Maybe that's with maroon tinted goggles, but Texas A&M had Lenoris Sellers dead to rights. It felt like 7 or 8 times in the backfield. And I don't believe the Aggies tallied a sack in this game. The missed tackles from the linebackers, from the safeties, from the defensive ends, it was egregious. And it allowed South Carolina to rush for 286 yards. The Aggies came into this game averaging 105 yards given up. That was one of the best marks in the Southeastern Conference. And the Gamecocks literally ran away with this ball game.
Yeah, Mitch, this is my, if we have any Aggie fans listening to this is your trigger warning. Cover your ears. In my opinion, this is the worst tackling game I've seen out of the Aggies since the Franchione era. There's no way that you can explain this otherwise. I know there were bad years, and 2013 wasn't that good. And there have been years where this wasn't great for A&M, but that was one of the worst performances tackling I've seen out of this A&M team in a very, very long time. And I really don't have an explanation for it outside of the fact that, it was just guys reading their press clippings, because tackling is just such a focus thing. At this point, they don't need anybody to teach them how to tackle, right? They know how to tackle. They're all D1 athletes. They don't need anybody to remind them to wrap up, remind them to not just swing at the ball. They know how to do that, and they didn't do it. They didn't pace it well. The hips are bad. The feet were bad. They're just all sorts of bad things. That's focus. That's just effort. And as much as I want to sit here as, an Aggie fan and say that, well, there were some bad calls and there's some penalties that shouldn't have been, or the penalties that should have been. And as much as I want to sit here and blame that, and as much as I want to sit here and blame some play calling and say that there were some bad decisions in play calling, and as much as I want to say that Marcel maybe didn't play his best game, he played plenty fine, in my opinion. I think he had a decent game. There were some issues around him, but, I think he played just fine. As much as I want to sit here and, talk about all that stuff and blame the Moss injury and everything else, there's nothing you can say outside of the fact that you gave up 289 on the ground after giving up, and here's the season totals the last several games. You gave up 52, 89, 168, 125, and 24 in your last 6 games. And then you give up 289 on the ground, by far the biggest total of the year. That's just completely unacceptable. There's no way that you can get around that, and I'm not going to try to even defend it. This is a massive focus issue, and they need to get it fixed and figured out, because you still are alive in the SEC. You have one SEC loss, just like everybody else that's in the lead of that conference, but now your margin for error is gone with that Texas game looming. So you beat Texas, you could be in this thing, and depending on tiebreaker rules, you could still make it to Atlanta. However, you need to beat Texas now. There is no more margin for error. And that's all that you can say as an Aggie fan at this point. So bad night, flush it, forget it, fix the problems, and go win after the bye week.
Yeah, I guess if you're looking for a positive, it makes the Texas game mean more now. That's the last positive thing I'm going to say.
Trey, losses in the regular season, they make games mean less because of the expanded playoff. What are you talking about?
Well, your margin of error is gone.
That game means less because there's not just 4 spots at the top, Trey. Come on.
Yeah, your margin of error is gone, like you said. Yeah, you nailed it. It's the lack of tackling. Really, the game changed for me. You think about how it played out. A&M goes down 14-0. Weathers that storm very nicely. Comes back and outscores South Carolina 20-3 until there's about a minute left in the second quarter. But then the penalties come in, and this is the biggest issue that A&M has had, other than giving up big chunk plays. That reared its ugly head. Obviously, had a lot to do with the missed tackles, but the penalties were rearing their ugly head once again. You let South Carolina go down and get into field goal range and kick a field goal to retie the game. That's where the game changed for me. You go into the halftime break with a lead. That team is hanging their head. They're not really believing they have as much of a chance because you dominated them for the better half of the rest of that first half after they jumped out to a 14-0 lead. So losing focus, like you said, Garrett, they've got a lot of really talented players on this defense. They are learning how to be part of a winning culture. And it's year 1, right? We are 9 games in to the Mike Elko era. And A&M fans, you have every right to be mad tonight. It's a frustrating loss. The final score does not tell the story of the game, and it was not a 24-point spread. There were some big plays at the end, but it's a frustrating loss. The goals are still ahead of you. Win out, get into the playoffs, see what happens. That's a great year 1 under Mike Elko. I know it's frustrating tonight. Got the whole bye week to think about the perspective, but win out, get in the playoff, see what happens. That's now the new goal.
For South Carolina, they moved to 5-3. It's a massive win for Shane Beamer, a massive win, I think, for the home atmosphere at Williams-Brice. Right when you thought that everyone was out of it, after that big start, the 14-0 start, you let them back in, like you said, with that last drive at the half. Raheem Sanders, Rocket Sanders, finally looked healthy. He had his best game against Texas A&M by a wide margin, 20 for 144, 2 touchdowns on the ground. He also had 92 yards receiving. Texas A&M had bottled him up every season he played against them at Arkansas. I mean, he was a non-factor in every one of those games. And tonight they let him be a factor by missed tackles, not holding the edge. It was frustrating, no doubt. Defensive line for South Carolina stuffed Texas A&M from getting even just a half yard. Half the time, I think they stuffed them on, it was at least 2 4th down conversions. And then I think Elko was too scared basically to go for it on 4th down after that. The defensive line was the X factor late in that game. They get to Marcel Reed 3 times. They force a couple of turnovers. So just a complete win from South Carolina. Now, you saw it on Twitter too, you need to see Shane Beamer build on this because he's had some of these statement wins. He beat Tennessee, he beat Clemson, but he's never done anything with it. He's never been able to build on it. And that's why I called South Carolina a vibes team, both in the preview and just extracurricular conversations as well. If you stop them, if you take that vibe away from them, they've been incapable of winning these big games. But unfortunately, the Aggies didn't tackle. I mean, you get half of the sacks that you should have had, right? South Carolina was one of the worst teams in the country coming in at protecting their quarterback. A&M got to him plenty of times. I mean, 7, 8 missed sacks at least. If you get half of those, I feel like it's a different game, but it's not. The Gamecocks come out on top. Good win for Shane Beamer and company. Elsewhere around the Southeastern Conference, Georgia really has to come back to win over Florida. And I want to have a conversation, I think, about what we think about Georgia's ceiling, because listen, the game kind of inconsequential. DJ Lagway is done for the season in all likelihood. It looked like a torn something. It left the field on a cart, comes back
it
out.
said hamstring on the broadcast, but who knows?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was upper leg, right? I don't think it was an ACL, but we'll see. His season, though, likely done. They turned to a Yale transfer who's a preferred walk-on. So, feels like the Gators' season is done and dusted. But for Georgia, they trail 13-6 going into halftime. Carson Beck throws 3 interceptions in this game. They just looked as unspectacular as Georgia has looked all year. And, we kind of laughed about me taking Florida to cover in the preview show. But sure enough, the game kind of played out the way that it needed to for Florida to get that number. And they almost lost it late because Georgia found a way to get some points on the board. They have some turnovers. The offensive adjustments were there for Kirby Smart and that offense. But guys, Georgia is winning in spite of Carson Beck, not because of him. And I feel like that's going to hold the Bulldogs back, whether it be the SEC championship, whether that be winning a game in the playoff. I just don't trust this Georgia team to win a big game with Carson Beck under center.
Yeah, and the big thing for me is looking at this game and watching a bunch of this game, I thought DJ Lagway, if he had stayed in the game, would have beaten Georgia. I know that might just be a hot take because they came out to a fast start. Maybe Georgia still makes the adjustments anyways, but I thought DJ Lagway was actually looking pretty good and keeping Georgia off balance on the defensive side of the ball. So, while there's certainly blame for Carson Beck, and I think that a lot of their offensive game plan has just kind of turned into, we have studs at wide receiver, so we can just chuck it up to them and eventually make it happen. As much as I think it's kind of turned into that, the running issues have been a problem pretty much all season long for Georgia. They haven't really run the ball very effectively. They've had spurts of it being good, and there have been times when it's been okay, but I mean, man, you're looking at 4.4 a carry. That's not the Georgia team that we've seen in the past, right? We haven't seen a Georgia team be ineffective like this. They had some, kind of bursts at times, but, Trevor Etienne, I know he got kind of banged up, but 7 for 31. Frazier comes in, it's 19 for 82. Maybe not the best in the whole world. I don't know. I'm just not super impressed with Georgia. They're the number 2 team right now. I don't think they did anything here that necessarily should get them dinged for that. However, they just don't look like that number 2 team. They just don't look like that type of dominant team we're used to seeing out of Georgia. Maybe they just have the athletes and it'll get them across the finish line. I don't think that works long term. I don't think that beats teams like Oregon or teams like Ohio State later on in the year.
Yeah, we all know that the AP poll voters don't watch all the games, so they're probably just going to look at the final score and see, oh, they won by 2 touchdowns in a rivalry game. That's great, but it's a real problem, these turnovers, man. I can't explain it. We joked about the Bobo offense on the preview show, but it's a real problem. It almost let Texas back in the game in Austin. It really prevented them from just running roughshod over the Longhorns when they were in Austin. And you're right, Garrett. I think it's going to make them lose a game that they shouldn't lose coming down the stretch. Maybe it was the Alabama game earlier, but going down the stretch, they still have a tough game against Tennessee. I think they play Ole Miss still too, right? And then the SEC championship game. So it's going to be really difficult for them to reach their final goals if they can't figure out how to get these turnovers under control.
Elsewhere around the SEC, and y'all, I've got a question for y'all. So Tennessee wins 28-18. That was an ugly game in the first quarter. Kentucky goes to the half up 10-7. Tennessee, I believe I saw this tweet from a CBS reporter. Tennessee scored in the first half for the first time since the end of September tonight when they got a touchdown late, too. I mean, they were being shut out by that Kentucky defense for the majority of that first half. They win by 10. Vanderbilt beats Auburn 17-7. Maybe we can talk about that here in a second, but I want to see what your temperature is on Ole Miss, because, boy, it looked like something clicked for them today. 63-31 over Arkansas. Jackson Dart has a career day, 515 yards, 6 touchdowns. 5 of those went to Jordan Watkins, who had 8 catches for 254 yards and 5 scores. Defensively, they did exactly what we talked about in the preview show could happen. They completely stuffed the run. Arkansas had nothing going. Taylon Green's injured once again, so Malachi Singleton has to come in. But the passing offense for Ole Miss, it was unchecked all day long. Trey, Ole Miss is 7-2. They're sitting there at 3-2 in the SEC. And we've said that Georgia's kind of the elimination game for them, right? That's what's kept them from being considered a real playoff contender after they lost those 2 early games. But I'll tell you what, if Jackson Dart slings the rock like that, they're going to beat Georgia by multiple scores.
Yeah, and again, if they get turnovers from Carson Beck like they got from Taylon Green today, that strip sack in the end zone really set them up. They got stood up on the goal line at the start of this game and then turned right around and got a strip sack in the end zone. That really got them going early. But you're absolutely right. It looked like the offense, all the woes they've had the last few weeks, out the window in Fayetteville. So maybe it's something in the water in Fayetteville, but we'll get to see that really soon against Georgia. I'm really excited to see how that matches up because it seems like there's a little bit of swagger back in Oxford. They got to win out, but they're certainly not eliminated yet. And if they can win out, they're probably in with their strength of record.
Auburn loses to Vanderbilt today, 17-7. Couple of notes on this game that I found just hilarious. So Vanderbilt, with that win, is now bowl eligible for the first time since 2018. They have swept the state of Alabama now with their wins over the Tide and now the Tigers for the first time since 1955. Guys, by doing that, Diego Pavia is now 3-0 all-time against Hugh Freeze. All 3 times he's gone on the road to do it. He's done it now twice on the Plains. For me, it's very clear that this Auburn experiment, or whatever it is with Hugh Freeze, it's not working. It's not a talent issue. He's blamed it. He said it's a talent issue before. Well, I don't have the right guys in here, but we're getting them in here. I don't know how you write off a loss to Vanderbilt, a very fun Vanderbilt team, a very plucky Vanderbilt team. But you look at the box score, and Vanderbilt didn't do anything overwhelmingly well in this game. Your offense stinks. It wasn't totally on Peyton Thorne. But to me, I think everything has to finally come back to the coaching, and that's Hugh Freeze. And I think he's done a terrible job at Auburn. And if you can't beat Vanderbilt at home, what are we doing?
I think Hugh Freeze needs a restraining order on Diego Pavia first and foremost, because it's like borderline stalking at this point. There's a lot to be said about what seems to be going on behind the scenes at Auburn. There's a lot of stuff that's leaked out that doesn't paint Hugh Freeze in the best of light. And that stuff doesn't tend to let you last very long at any coaching job, let alone a big SEC job. So it's going to depend on if there's anything positive down the stretch. They have some tough SEC games. They host A&M, go to Alabama down the stretch. It's going to depend on if he can pull a rabbit out of his hat and I think win one of those two games. They have a nice recruiting class coming in, but if you're an Auburn booster, do you want Hugh Freeze coaching those guys? Because it seems like he's not really in it for not going to be able to get those guys to live up to their potential.
Yeah, and the fact of the matter is, Vanderbilt looked like the better team out there probably because they were, and that's a massive problem because Auburn should be the better team just based on talent and what Hugh Freeze has, but they just aren't right now. However, I do think the best thing that came out of this game, and I'm going to go ahead and share this one because, Trey, you need some credit for this one. This was the best thing to come out of this game. Neither team necessarily played very well, but our graphics team absolutely cooked with this. So shout out to Trey. Fantastic job on the meme here. Very timely, very needed right now.
Yeah, I kind of bummed that didn't go viral. I'm not going to lie. Yeah. I thought that was a really good idea, and it didn't get as many retweets as I wanted, but we'll take it. They should get their 9 electoral votes for dominating the state of Alabama.
They should.
Love it. To the ACC we go, and a couple of gems to pick through here. We talked about SMU winning. Crazy game with Syracuse and Virginia Tech as the Orange pulled that one out late. Was that in overtime? That was in overtime. Yeah. Miami outlasts Duke 53-31. That is not the way that game went. It looks like Miami
covered. What are you talking about?
They coasted to a win. There was a time when Miami was down. I've forgotten what the score was. There's a tweet that I put out that reminded everyone, Duke was 20-point dogs during the middle of this week. I guess Vegas knows what they're doing because Malik Murphy got the call from somebody who had money on the line and just started chucking it deep in double coverage. The most unnecessary throws maybe that I saw all day were from Malik Murphy just arm punting over and over again when Duke had momentum. And then he just throw it into double coverage way over his receiver's head, right to a Miami safety. I felt like that was a big turning point in the game. Do you trust Miami? I think the question is as simple as that.
They keep getting it done, and that's the big thing is they keep finding ways to win. I have been big on they keep getting home cooking from those ACC offices. They didn't really need it today. It happens, but didn't really need it today. They just showed that they were better, and this was a good Duke defense I thought was going to hold them down, and then they just kind of exploded there in the second half. I don't think that these mistakes are really going to start costing them until they hit the playoff, maybe the ACC championship game. If it's SMU or Clemson against them, they could possibly take advantage of those mistakes. But I really don't think these mistakes are going to cost them until they hit the playoffs. They will cost them against better teams. It doesn't matter who they're matched up against. You make these types of mistakes against teams like, Georgia, Ohio State, whoever ends up at the top, Oregon, those other teams, you're not going to survive for very long throwing the balls that Cam Ward throws and making some of the mistakes that they make. But for now, they get to play in the ACC, and a lot of those teams, you can kind of just throw it off their hands to your guy. Who's to say that wasn't like a trick play or something? Just the way they drew it up.
That's right. You got to give Miami credit for finding a way to win. Eventually, it feels like one of these times that they're going to run out of lives, but wasn't today.
Who's going to beat them, though? That's what I want to know on their schedule.
Yeah, maybe the Mustangs, maybe SMU and the ACC championship.
Yeah, remaining schedule in the ACC: Georgia Tech, Wake Forest, Syracuse. I'm not really scared of that if I'm Miami.
They do go to Syracuse.
It is.
If they take a knee, they should beat Georgia Tech. So
yeah, we got to make sure that one's in the playbook before next weekend. But I'm not necessarily scared about the rest of their schedule. If they had Clemson on here in the regular season, I might think about it, but I'm not really worried about it. Now, they go match up with either SMU or Clemson in the ACC. I did mention that. That could be a place where it comes back to bite you because both of those teams have offenses that can take advantage of mistakes. That's the big thing is right now, they really haven't played an offense that can take advantage of mistakes. And when they have, there have been little things that have, gone their way or, like I mentioned, the home cooking from the ACC offices, but it is what it is.
Clemson, the 11th ranked team in the country, speaking of November chaos, they lose to Louisville 33-21. Guys, this is Louisville's first ever win over Clemson. They had never previously beaten the Tigers, and it's done in just a bizarre fashion. Louisville runs way more than they pass. Shuck only had 156 yards, did not throw a touchdown, did not throw an interception. But Louisville rushes for 210 yards on the ground. They get 3 touchdowns. They block a field goal that they then take for a scoop and score as well. I mean, Clemson was just off tonight. They were not buttoned up. They were down 17-7 at the half. They get shut out in the third quarter as well. I believe they actually were shut out in both the second and the third quarter. Clemson fans are leaving midway through the third quarter. It was just a bizarre night in Death Valley. And now Clemson, who you felt like had figured it all out. I mean, you guys talked about it on the Takeout show on Monday. Clemson had really gotten the ball rolling. Cade Klubnik was rolling. Phil Maffa runs for 171 yards and 2 touchdowns. I mean, he did everything he could tonight, but this was a team loss. I feel like very similarly to Texas A&M, just kind of no-showing in a game. Clemson, relatively speaking, no-shows, and they were at home, and now they've got work to do, and they need someone to slip up, whether it be SMU or Miami. Otherwise, they're not going to be playing for an ACC championship game.
They tried to kind of bully Louisville, it felt like. It felt like they tried to grind it out, have long possessions, and those long possessions just didn't really pay off. They, like, Klubnik threw for a lot of yards, 228, but it was 4.1 yards per attempt. There's nothing downfield. Louisville did a great job of taking that away. They just couldn't connect on very many big plays. And Louisville had the ball for like half the time that Clemson did, but they cashed in on their opportunities. Clemson did not. Clemson had 23 third down attempts in this game. That, like, you're not going to win a lot of football games when you're not being successful on first and second down. I don't have the stats on how long those attempts were. They converted 11 of them, but 23 third down attempts is just absolutely absurd. That means you're 3 yards in a cloud of dust on offense. And if you have the ball long enough, sure, you're going to rack up some yards. But, man, just a really surprising result for Clemson with what they had looked like the last few weeks. And now all of a sudden they are on thin ice to make the ACC championship and therefore the playoff.
Trey, it was also weird because they were 5 of 6 on fourth down. They went for it a bunch and kept converting. And so that you can turn that into, if you just add that 16 of 23, which is actually a fairly good conversion rate. And when you look at the rest of the stats, I mean, they had 31 first downs to Louisville's 19. They outgained them by 90 yards. They passed for more yards. They rushed for more yards. They did almost everything you want to do statistically. Like, statistically, they did almost everything you want to do. They just didn't score points. They just didn't finish those drives. They missed a field goal. Like, they just kept not finishing drives, and that's going to come back and cost you eventually. That's what happened.
Yeah, I mean, it's 10 plays for 30 yards, 5 minutes off the clock, and you punt. It's 10 plays for 50 yards, 4 minutes off the clock, you miss a field goal, right? Like, that's great. You're dominating time of possession, 13 plays, 68 yards, 6 minutes off the clock, miss a field goal. Got to cash those in. You got to take advantage of your opportunities, or you're going to get beat like you did.
Let's go to the Big 12, shall we? And this is where we had plenty of November chaos. We have Texas Tech knocking off Iowa State, previously undefeated. Iowa State at home, 23-22. We'll talk about that. Kansas State loses to Houston. Trey, don't look now. They're 4-5. They're 3-3 in the conference, just like we all anticipated. And Baylor just walked off TCU with a last-second field goal to upset the Horned Frogs. Shout out to us on the preview show for both feeling the Baylor vibes a little bit, taking Baylor at home. But let's go to Ames here, where now, I mean, you talk about what happened in Ames, what happened in Houston in a monsoon, as you referenced earlier. The Big 12 is now controlled by BYU and Colorado. We are living in a weird simulation right now. Talk to me, Trey, a little bit about what you saw from Texas Tech, who we wrote off in that game. They were 13.5-point dogs. We figured Texas Tech's defense wouldn't be able to stop anybody. They held Iowa State to 3, 10, nothing, and 9 points in each of the 4 quarters.
Yeah, that was the story. The defense bowed up found a way to dig deep. Again, it was a sloppy game. There was a lot of rain in this one too. Monsoon I reserved for the category of Kansas State Houston. That was just ridiculous at one point. And 5 miles away, they weren't playing football. So
Yeah,
I
right.
don't know who made the decision to keep going in that one. But yeah, I mean, they hold Iowa State to 133 yards rushing. Iowa State really couldn't get a lot going on the ground. That's kind of been a bugaboo for the Cyclones this year, consistently running the football. Rocco Beck was great at moments. The throw right before halftime to finally take the lead.
Beautiful throw.
Fantastic, beautiful. They scored, I think, right, to take the lead over Texas Tech late, but left just enough time, and they just couldn't get off the field on that last drive. Yeah, left the scored with 2 minutes left, left Tech 2 minutes and 11 seconds, and then Tech marched 12 plays, 71 yards in a minute 47. Just couldn't get off the field, and it was big chunk plays too. It converted a fourth down, converted a couple third downs as well. Couldn't get off the field, and that's how you get beat and upset, and now don't control your own destiny in the Big 12.
Yeah, Baron Morton struggled at times, barely throws just above 50%, 21 of 40, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks in this one. Taj Brooks, at times I felt like they were forgetting that Taj Brooks was on their team. That final drive, they're down there inside the 5-yard line. It's like, hand the ball off to Taj Brooks and let's go home. They tried some trick plays. They tried, this, that, and the other. Baron Morton was out wide. They were going to go wildcat, and then finally they go quads to the field, and they run a wildcat sweep with Taj Brooks just getting the student body in front of him and going into the corner of the end zone.
Very creative play call. I really liked that one.
Yeah, no,
he had some questionable ones today,
I
that
tweeted.
Really,
yeah, I tweeted. I'm in a pick'em league with a bunch of Red Raiders as a part of it, and I said, Zach Kitley made me want to tear my hair out and throw things at the TV for a good chunk of that game. But when the Red Raiders needed good play calling, they found a way. Josh Kelly, shout out to him as well. 8 catches. I believe he was targeted almost 20 times in this game. Somehow only has 8 catches, but for 127 yards and 2 scores for the Red Raiders. Elsewhere, Houston knocks off Kansas State. The Wildcats just could not get anything going, and they had some turnovers at the worst possible time. Houston, we knew, was going to take some time to build into something real, but Zion Chris didn't have to do much through the air, but he goes 11 of 11 for a touchdown, 103 yards. It was his running, though, that really kept the Wildcats at bay. He has 75 yards rushing on 22 carries. I don't know. I feel like Kansas State, we've been here before with the Wildcats. They drop a head scratcher, and it's going to inevitably, I think, keep them out of the Big 12 title race and by extension, I think, the playoff.
Well, and the story for Houston this year hasn't been the offense. They've been kind of a stinky offense. They've been very bad, but the defense is actually pretty good, 45th in scoring. And I mean, showed it today, played a pretty good game against the Kansas State offense. We expected to come out and be able to run the football. If I tell Kansas State fans ahead of this game, hey, it's going to be, pouring down rain, but you're going to throw for 238, you probably take that and say, hey, well, cool. Well, you mix that with how good our run game is. And, we'll take that to the bank. We're going to get out of Houston, no problem. And then you turn around and realize DJ Giddens runs for 2.9 a carry, and they run for 89 as a team. That ain't going to get it done. And they absolutely got outclassed in that regard. And look, I mean, we knew Willie Fritz was going to get these guys going at some point. We knew that, at some point, as good of a coach as he is, he was going to get Houston turned around. A lot better result in year one than I was expecting out of Houston. Hasn't been the best. They need to get some guys in there. They got to fix the offense, but they've been playing pretty good on that defensive side, playing with some toughness, and 4-5 in year one. They split that 3-3 in conference. I'll take it.
Go ahead, Mitch.
I was gonna say year one to have wins over TCU and Kansas State. That's a building block, right? I mean, Trey, when we did the season preview for them, I think we had them at 2-10. We couldn't realistically find a Big 12 conference game that we felt confident about them winning. They've gone on the road to beat, an offensive happy TCU team at times. And now they've eliminated a team from conference title contention.
I'm going to pat myself on the back a little bit, Mitch. If you go back and look at our preview article, I wrote about Houston. And I actually said, I think they might find something back half of the year. Willie Fritz might find something, and they might sneak into a bowl game. So.
And you did pick them to beat Kansas State.
That's
I
right. That
did
was
mention they would beat Kent. No, I'm just kidding. For Kansas State's part, though, it really looked like they were content to let their defense win this game. Just kind of ice the clock on offense. They were up like 19-10, I think, or something like that. And then Avery Johnson throws an interception, gives them a short field touchdown, and they just let Zion break loose on a long touchdown run, and that sunk them. So this Big 12 race is going to be wild, man. I still don't think BYU is going to go undefeated. They're going to lose to somebody stupid. I know. I'm not a believer in BYU being 12-0. I apologize for that.
Trey, I'm trying to keep your seat warm for you here, buddy, but you're going to need to decide to hop on pretty soon, man.
I don't think I ever am, Garrett. I'm not going to lie to you. I think maybe they have the magic that TCU did in the regular season a couple years ago, but this Big 12 race, I think, is just starting to heat up, and something really wild is going to happen really soon.
Trey, it's totally fair. I'm not even sure I fully believe. I'm just jumping on it because it's fun, man.
Well, the funny thing is, referencing TCU in that run to the title against Georgia, they got so many things to go their way, right? So many turnovers, so many explosive plays on offense. Every little break that could have happened went in favor of the Frogs. And then the next year they went, 4-8, right? And we're just an utter dumpster fire. And we talked about that. We talked about TCU probably having the pendulum swing. If BYU has everything go their way this year, they had better pay it off, because if history tells us anything, it's that next year is going to be hell on wheels. So,
Well, don't worry about next year. Next week is the Holy War, so we're gonna stay up and watch that one. That's gonna be a lot of fun.
That should be a good time. Let's go to the Big Ten to end out the power conferences. We talked about Oregon. We've talked about Ohio State. Indiana falls down 10-0. It's the first time all season that Kurt Cignetti and the boys have trailed. Trey, how'd they respond?
They scored 47 unanswered, Mitch. 47-10 was the final.
Is that good?
It's pretty good. It's not bad.
Did you see what Cignetti said afterwards in the postgame, by the way?
I missed it. What did he say?
He was like, well, at least we know how we respond when we're down now. I was like, oh, that is – put that on a T-shirt. Home field's already screen printing. They're staying up late in the lab tonight.
I'm really excited to see where they end up in the college football playoff rankings. I think you got to put them around 6, because I know they don't have the signature win, but the way they are just destroying teams and abandon all hope ye who play Indiana. They are just blowing everybody out. You got to put them top 7, top 6.
They have to be. They should be a top 10 team right now. I think that, thankfully, we kind of rag sometimes on the big media college football shows because they talk about the same 10 teams over and over again. But to their credit, I heard a lot of shows going after the AP voters and saying, how on earth is Indiana, a team that is beating teams by an average margin of like 30 plus points, how are they not a top 10 team when we are in the middle of a season where there may not be one true elite team, right? Like it's the Hall of Very Good, and sometimes not even the Hall of Very Good. But Indiana is one of those teams that stands alone by every statistical metric. You go, it's a good football team over there in Hoosierland, right? They absolutely should be a top 10 team. I hope that the playoff committee rewards that this weekend. After a 47-10 win over Michigan State, very impressive there.
I have a question on this, actually. Are they about to run the table? Because I was checking their schedule just to peek ahead. They got Michigan at home. They should win that one, right? I mean, Michigan, not very good. Played a little bit better today. Still not very good. They get a bye week before going to Ohio State. That's at Ohio State. Obviously, that's a tough spot. But Ohio State hasn't looked that good, and that'll be a look-ahead spot potentially for Ohio State, looking ahead to the game. So I'm not saying that I'm predicting it now, but it wouldn't shock me. And if they can get past Ohio State, just will their way to a victory somehow, it's Purdue and then possibly a home game, basically, in the Big Ten championship game. So I know not technically a home game, but basically, I mean, it's in your state. It's right there. They have a pretty decent chance to run the table here. I think. I mean, just looking at Ohio State's playing, they're not necessarily blowing teams out looking that impressive. They got a big win today, but I don't know.
I think being able to run the ball is a huge deal for Ohio State to kind of proof of concept this week. What makes me hesitant to 2 weeks out pick Indiana to win that game outright in Trey, I want to get your thought on this as well. Ohio State has the 8th best pass defense. They're a top 30 unit in sacks and tackles for loss. I feel like for a team that maybe hasn't beaten one of the big boys yet, that is kind of a welcome to the varsity level competition.
I'm kind of there with you. It's going to be really interesting, though. I don't count out Kirk Cignetti in that situation, in a spot where everybody's going to be overlooking him. I bet the line will be about 17 points. I bet it'll be about 16 and a half or 17, if I had to guess. With Ohio State at home, that's just how Ohio State is perceived. I bet you that line opens at about 16 and a half.
And do you have a neutral ratings model on that, or is that just asking a certain sports book for your opinions?
It's pulling it out of my ass, Garrett. That's what it is. But sorry, kids.
Ray, you can't do that in this industry.
But I bet I just bookmark that. I think it's going to be about a 16 and a half point spread. I think it'll be a closer game than that. It'll probably be a really ugly defensive game, but I'm not quite ready to pick Indiana to beat Ohio State yet, like you said, Mitch, but 11-1 feels like the floor. 11-1 absolutely feels like the floor with the way that they responded today.
Given my track record against the spread this year, I'm literally like a coin flip. I think I'm hitting at about a 50% clip against the spread. I'd be concerned at how fast I would jump on the Hoosiers plus the points given that spread. So yeah, that will be a fascinating line. We might have to make a little mashup later.
So right now, just going off SP Plus, it would be before this week, it would be about a 13 and a half point spread if you just went off SP Plus.
Okay.
So not too far off. I bet
that
a little bit of
Ohio
right. State tax to bet Ohio State.
Somewhere in the 10 and a half, 13 and a half range, I think feels like a competitive line for sure. Shout out to Minnesota. They beat Brett Bielema for the first time ever in his coaching career. He was previously 10-0 against the Gophers of both Wisconsin. I'm not sure if he played them in Arkansas, but Wisconsin and Illinois, he was undefeated. Minnesota wins 25-17. They rally in this one for their 4th straight win. Minnesota's going bowling. We weren't really sure about that in the preseason, so congratulations to the Gophers. I don't know if you guys have a thought on Nebraska losing to UCLA.
It smells like 2023 in here. That's what
guys, Nebraska. I tried so hard to dispel the voodoo that you guys were casting on them that they wouldn't make a bowl game this year, but they lose a real stinker at home to UCLA, who's suddenly just like way better on the road than they are at home. I can't explain that. But Nebraska's now, after getting to a 5-1 start, they've now lost their last 3 to Indiana, Ohio State, UCLA. They have to play USC, which is truly a game for who wants to go bowling more. Is that next week? No, it's off a bye, so they'll play on the 16th. And then they play against Wisconsin, who just got bludgeoned by Iowa, and then they finish in the Heroes game at Iowa. There is still absolutely a path to a bowl game here. Big Red Nation, just make sure you get there.
I'd like to formally abandon my Nebraska belief. I'm not belief that they can make a bowl game. I think they'll find a way, but man, the voodoo stuff is pretty real. And yeah, this has been pretty disappointing of a season. They should have played a lot better than this. Things just kind of collapsing on them. And yeah, not what I expected out of them to start the year.
I know the FPI is very flawed and it has not been updated for today's results, but here are their chances to win their final 3 games. It is 17.8% at USC. It is 43.8% at home against Wisconsin and 29.7% on the road at Iowa.
I almost want them to be needing that win against Iowa one more time this year, because that would be absolute must-watch TV again. That would just be insane to watch them need that win for a bowl game.
Friday night standalone game, Black Friday.
Yep. My father-in-law and brother-in-law will be there at that game. I can't have that. I cannot have that happen for their sake. Nebraska, if you're going to get it done in the next 2 weeks. Obviously, I think their chance to win, I would hope, against USC would go up after USC loses to Washington tonight. They lost 26-21. Trey, shout out us. We called that one outright. And then Iowa dump trucks Wisconsin at home, 42-10. The backup quarterback, Brendan Sullivan, played. And if you thought, well, that's great, Iowa's going to air the ball out a little bit more. Nope. 7-10 for 93 yards and a tutter. It was the all Iowa team rushing attack, though. They had 5 guys carry the ball tonight. 54 rushing attempts, 329 yards, and 5 tutters. That is good for 6.1 an attempt tonight. The Hawkeyes just straight up ran right through the Badgers.
Yeah, there's a Brent Key gift for that.
With
run the damn ball.
Oh yes, Brent Key. Yeah. For some reason, I was thinking Brent Pry.
No, not Brent Pry. No, the other Brent in the ACC. But no, this fun game to go back and catch some of the highlights of. Didn't necessarily go through here and watch all this, but caught a couple of highlights as I was commiserating over Texas A&M at the end of the night. And this is a fun one, man. It's just old school football. I went to a high school where all we do is run the football. It was kind of reminding me of that. Just watching them go. We're going to line up and we're going to punch you in the face. So it was a lot of fun just watching some good old fashioned running game. And if you run the ball 54 times and average 6.1 on the ground, you're going to have a fun night.
That's impressive. No doubt about it. Trey, let's finish up here with some group of 5 shout outs. I think we both are weeping some Memphis tears tonight after they lose to UTSA 44-36. You and I both in various mediums locked them up at -7.
What the heck?
Seth Hennigan throws for 454 yards, but it didn't matter because Memphis didn't take a defense to San Antonio. I did wish that I had known that UTSA is like 10-1 or something like that in their last 2 years at home. Apparently they just can't get the job done on the road, but boy, you go to the Triangle of Toughness, they don't lose at home. So shame on us for not finding that nugget.
UTSA scored 30 straight points at one point in this game. They went on a 30-0 run. How do you let that happen, Memphis? I don't understand.
It's disgusting. Old Dominion, who is in the driver's seat in the Sun Belt East, whichever side of
they're in the East. Yep.
Whichever side of the Sun Belt they reside in. Then they let App State beat them today, 28-20. So Sun Belt's going to be a whole lot of fun in the month of November. What else? You had ULM.
Navy lost to Rice 24-7.
Did that game go final? It did.
Yeah.
How about that? Look at EJ Warner, Dean Connors slinging the rock.
Did that game break the rain delay record? I saw that it was close. I don't know if it did or not.
I don't know. It was like a 5-hour delay.
I saw it. I think Navy even tweeted it out saying, like, we've been delayed for 4 hours and something odd minutes, and the all-time record is 5 hours and some minutes, and we might make history tonight, but we're certainly not rooting for it.
Well, and what's funny about that is, like, while that game was delayed, Trey, you mentioned it earlier, just a couple of minutes down the road, Houston says, F it, we ball. They're beating Kansas State.
I don't know, like, what Big 12 official was like, you know what? Maybe one of our best hopes at a playoff win should have to play Houston in a monsoon while they're delayed right down the road.
Yeah.
Who decided that?
That's a big Army right there from the conference.
Army found a way today against Air Force with a backup quarterback, 20-3.
Gosh, that was an ugly game. That was a really painful
game. 2 service
game.
Academies playing, so yes, it was very ugly.
It was in the top left of my quad box this morning, and every time I looked up, I went, oh, man, I wish Bryson Daly was playing in this game. Coastal might stink. Again, they lost to Troy and didn't just lose to Troy, but like kind of got controlled by Troy today, 38-24, which not fun. Hawaii beats Fresno State. Good for the Rainbow Warriors. Timmy Chain gang.
That was a comeback, right?
Yeah,
I think Fresno was up in that one for a while.
They were. A really good game that I'm will go back and watch the highlights of this one. Georgia Southern beats South Alabama on the, I guess, the Saturday Showdown pod that I was on earlier this week. We went back and forth about who would score more points in this one, Georgia Southern or South Alabama. I took South Alabama at home. They can't get it done in the friendly confines. A little disappointing there. And then, Trey, you pointed this out right before we hit record. Colorado State beats Nevada 38-21. Nevada is winless in the Mountain West Conference this season, but Colorado State has quietly reeled off 4 wins in a row, and now they're 6-3 and leading the way out west.
Yeah, tied with Boise at the top of the conference and bowl eligible. It didn't seem possible with what we saw at the beginning of the season. Another surprise bowl eligible team is UConn, who got it done against Georgia State Friday night. And
Yeah.
we are on bowl watch officially for Hawaii, fellas. I don't know. They're 4-5 with this win against Fresno State. Pulling that out is huge. They host UNLV next week. That's a tough one. But after that, it's at Utah State, who's 2-6, and then hosting New Mexico, who's 3-6. So
Yeah.
in those last two, we're bowling in Hawaii as well.
Listen, that Mountain West Conference preview was a whole lot of chaos to sort through, but I did. You patted yourself on the back earlier for Houston. I'll pat myself on the back for Hawaii. I did say if the offense gets rolling, the defense just stops somebody every once in a blue moon. Hawaii in the postseason could be a reality.
Hey, we need to find some way to get Hawaii to the Bahamas Bowl just for the absurdity of the travel.
That would be sick.
We need some way to make that happen.
And that would be that would be kind of the least audacious travel plan, I feel like, given some of the Big Ten travels this season. All right, well, let's get out of here on that. Week 10, whole lot of chaos. Hopefully your team won. Ours didn't. That's all right. We ride anyway into Week 11. Monday's show, Trey, I don't want to speak for the run sheet on the 3-Tech Takeout, but we do. That is the night before the only thing going on in the nation, which will be the college football playoff rankings coming out. We will finally have those to talk about with some legitimacy. And now we're into the month of November. Your favorite team is probably either really good in the month of November or really bad, depending on what part of the country you're in. So we'll be talking about November runs into December, who's hot, who's not, plenty more, I'm sure. For Trey Reeves and Garrett Turney, I'm Mitch Mason. Thanks for hanging out with us tonight. Until Monday night's 3-Tech Takeout. So long, everybody.
Gracious. Yep.